Edward Glucksmann, and I am the Science Communications Fellow at the European Geosciences Union Executive Office based in Munich. I'm spending a year there learning the tricks of the trade of social media. You may already be following us on Twitter, Facebook, and the like, and you'll have heard from me and Barbara Ferreira. And my task today is to chair the first of this great tradition that the EGU has, the great debates. And it's, one could say, the EGU's version of the Hunger Games, for those of you familiar, but hopefully it won't turn to that, though one of our panelists has their motorcycle helmet with them, just in case. So I'd like to welcome everybody in the room and also everybody watching around the world. This is being web streamed live, and you can also watch it on our website afterwards in case you want a replay. So as I said, this is the great debate is now becoming a great tradition and is growing through the years. And speaking then of great growth, well, today's topic is, of course, open science and the future of publishing. And this is a topic that's very close to the hearts of EGU members. The EGU is a signatory of the 2003 Berlin Declaration on Open Access to Scientific Knowledge, and that's one of the major milestones, in fact, in the open access movement. And the EGU has grown alongside Copernicus now and is in charge of 14 open access journals. So before we start, a bit of housekeeping. The debate will go on for about 80 minutes. And we will be taking audience questions almost from the very beginning. Be sure that you have one of the roaming mics before you start speaking, as we need to capture your voice for everyone around the world. So, in the hot seats today, I'll introduce to you from left to right. We have Eric Merkel-Sobota, Executive Vice President in Corporate Communications at Springer. Next to him, we have Martin Rasmussen, and Martin is a familiar face here at the conference, Managing Director of Copernicus and organizer of meetings and open access publications. Next to Martin, of course, we have Angelika Lex, VP Academic and Government Relations at Elsevier. To Angelika's right, we have Caroline Sutton, Open Access Publisher and President of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association. To her right, we have Damien Pattinson, the Executive Editor of PLOS ONE. And finally, Rodri Jackson, Senior Publisher of Oxford Open at the Oxford University Press. Now, to start off, of course, this open access has been in the news daily almost for the past few months, even years. And this week, of course, yesterday we heard that Harvard have declared that they are too poor to pay the fees for that journals are charging. And of course, that raises eyebrows when a name like that brings it up. Secondly, of course, we know that the Cost of Knowledge website has now reached 10,000 signatures, and that is the online petition in favor of open access. So now we're going to turn it over to our panelists. They're going to briefly introduce themselves and their role within their organization. And perhaps we could start with a very fundamental question, which is, of course, what is the future of academic publishing, and how do we get there? And if we could start perhaps with Rodri Jackson.
Is my mic already on?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's a nice, thanks Edward for the introduction and for a nice, simple question to deal with. I'm sure I'm just going to sum that up in a minute and that's just going to be that done. We might as well go home after that, but anyway. So my name's Rodri Jackson. I'm a senior publisher at Oxford University Press. And Edward already mentioned about the growth of open access publishing and my role within OUP is kind of indicative of that. And that when I started, 5 or 6 years ago, open access was just a sideline in my role, something I did out of interest more than anything else, and it's grown over the years, and now it's part of my job title, part of my job description. I have staff working for me, working on open access publishing, and that's just one small organizational example of how open access has grown as a percentage of the publishing business and continues to grow. I actually wrote a piece in the EGU's paper for today, the conference paper, the EGU today, about how I think open access is going to affect scholarly publishing and professional publishing over the next few years. And basically I said what I'm going to say now, which is that I don't know, I can't claim to have the answers to those questions. I think our position at OUP is very much that it's what it's always been. We've always had the perspective that we are a publisher there to fulfill the needs of our authors, and if the needs of our authors happen to be open access publishing, or if the needs of our market is open access publishing, then that's something we'll facilitate. But of course, it's very important to note, and I know we're at a scientific conference, but we also publish in lots of other subject areas. I, for example, still have a list of law journals, and in those areas, open access, there's not so much to drive for it, and there's not so much the need for it necessarily. So I think it's worth noting that open access is a growing part of the industry, and it is going to increase. Its growth is going to increase. I think that's evident to all. But there's no one-size-fits-all thing here, and I think we need to be aware of differences in different areas.
Thank you. Damien.
Okay, so hello, I'm Damien Pattinson. I'm the executive editor of PLOS ONE. I realise that actually a lot of you probably may not have heard of the Public Library of Science, mainly because we're primarily a biomedical publisher. So I thought I'd give you a very quick history, which is that it was launched about 10 years ago as a non-profit company. It was launched in San Francisco by 3 academics, one of whom Nobel laureates called Harold Varmus, and then 2 other academics in Stanford and Berkeley. And the aim was really to become an advocacy group in the first instance, and then a publisher whose aim it was to promote open access. The reason they became a publisher was that they felt that there was a need to actually prove the business model of open access, and so that was the initial intention. So they launched with 2 journals about 10 years ago, which were aimed to be quite high-impact journals, very selective, and then they launched another 4 journals a few years later, also in the biomedical field. And then 5 years ago, they launched PLOS ONE, of which I'm the executive editor. So PLOS ONE was quite different to other journals in that we had a very different set of criteria for acceptance. Actually, the other thing I should say is that it's not just biomedical, it's across science. So we do accept submissions from all areas, not just life sciences. So what PLOS ONE did was to look to evaluate at pre-peer review. At pre-publication peer review, they would only evaluate the quality of the science. So the only questions that we would ask our reviewers were: is this science right? Is it technically correct, and are the conclusions supported by the data? If the answers to those were yes, then we would publish the paper on the journal. So we weren't asking for any kind of assessment of impact or novelty or significance to the field, a level of advancement, anything like that. We felt that kind of assessment could be made by readers at post-publication. So we wanted to promote that kind of, separate the peer review process into the rigor of the science, and then also the impact of it would then be assessed post-publication. And it was hugely successful. Clearly, this was something that people were interested in, people wanted, and the growth has been enormous. We're now the biggest journal in the world. We're due to publish 2,000 papers this month. So we are, really at a different level to any other journal. And I think that really is just indicative that clearly this was something that people were interested in, and that and I think that says a lot about where the community feels open access is going.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Yep.
Okay. My name is Caroline Sutton, and as was mentioned, I'm president of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, and actually most of the panel here, actually with the exception of Elsevier, are actually members of OWASPA. So what you hear will represent sort of, I think, the breadth of our organization. As Edward mentioned, I'm also a publisher myself. I'm the founder of Co-Action Publishing. We're based in Scandinavia, and we launched 5 years ago. And we're in some sense, joining this growth of open access, at least in the geological sciences, Copernicus being a very large publisher and full open access, we're also publishing TELUS A and TELUS B, which you might be aware of, and Polar Research that are in related areas here. I think this is such an exciting time to be a scientist and to be a publisher working in this area. If I think back 10 years ago, things were still just trying to get online in some cases. And now we're talking about not just open access, but open data, open science, something much more broadly than just writing a paper and getting that out to everyone. I just recently participated in a meeting that was called the Budapest Open Access Initiative 10 Years On. So 10 years ago, a group of scientists and others got together to talk about open access and what their vision was. And so this was a group that was brought together to talk about where should we be going in the next 10 years. And I think what became so interesting there was, in one sense, the case for it no longer has to be made. We see that there's huge growth, PLOS ONE being an example of how quickly that's growing. I know Biomed Central is publishing over 25,000 articles last year. So, and if you look at the growth curves of these organizations, they just went pew. We also see that so many traditional publishing houses are now getting involved in open access in areas where they see that they can start to explore and work with this in ways that will still be sustainable with their businesses. There are a number of PLOS ONE sort of clones that have come out recently this past year. So there's a tremendous amount happening right now. So when we met in Budapest recently, the discussions now are sort of going on about which licensing should we be pushing for? I mean, how do we, what is really open? So open access was intended on the one hand to be free access to it, but also reuse, because the whole point is you also need to be able to reuse it if you find it. So there's those discussions going on. A lot in the area of impact as well. And this has to do with all journals, not just open access journals, but the way in which your research will be evaluated in the future because of the possibilities we have due to technology today is also changing, and there's huge discussions going on about that. The linking with open data and trying to expand that is also happening. So I could go on and on and on actually, so I'll just pass on the mic because, as I say, I think it's really exciting and there is so much happening. And there's really kind of a surge pushing forward right now.
Thank you. Angelica.
You have your own.
Okay, my name is Angelica Lex. I'm Vice President for Academic Relations at Elsevier. I'm also very excited about the times that we are in at the moment, both for publishers as well as for researchers. I started out my life in the science world as a biologist myself, so I do feel very much connected with you all here in this room as well. I joined Elsevier quite a number of years ago, many years ago, and did actively not only witness, but also was very much involved in the whole huge change from changing from a print world or print-centered world in research to a digital world. That went with tremendous investments and change as far as the industry was concerned, but it also, I think, very much created the basis for increasing access as we see it today. And I would say that is one core element and one very important element that we as a company still do hold up and see as very, very important. And at the core of what we're doing, we need to increase access to high quality information worldwide. And we can continue to engage in that very actively. I think the second point that I would like to make is that that open access, as we've seen it here, and we're seeing it grow, we do recognize is something that is definitely here to stay. I think the challenge for all of us is to do this or to increase access to information in many different diverse areas, be that for researchers, but also for developing countries, for patients, for doctors, for many different areas of the research world. And I think that that has to be done in a sustainable way. And it needs to be done, in our view, probably by in many different ways, by using many and setting up many different business models that cater for the individual needs for all of those different groups. We're not sure whether there's actually one single answer to the needs that we see out there for researchers. One thing that is also incredibly important, and I would really like to strengthen that here, is that we need to do this, and we need to find and pave the way to the future for increasing access, better access, and also more effective access for those who need to use scientific information in a very collaborative way. I think at Elsevier we do certainly recognize that we need to listen more, we need to speak a lot more, and that's really my core function. I meet a lot with scientific leaders at universities and academies, but also funding organizations, to listen and to understand what their needs are, not only now, but also in the future, and engage in trying to answer those needs together. So I think that's
Thank you. Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, I'm Martin Rasmussen from Copernicus, and it was my pleasure to join a great combination, a vibrant combination of a scientific association like the EGU and Copernicus in 2004. We started in 2001 with open access publishing, so we celebrated last year 10 years of open access publishing. And in those days we had also the chance to launch, based on the concept of Uli Pöschl and Paul Crutzen, and supported by the EGU and other scientific institutions and scientists, a way of not leaving it only to the open access to the final publication, but also providing open access to the whole peer review process, namely by establishing the way what we call public peer review, which should not be mixed up with open peer review, where a referee has to be eponymous. But for us, it is really that you have access to all the referee comments throughout the entire peer review process, and this stays online, it is citable. And this combination, I think, produced some facts. Fact one is that open access is established. There's I think, no discussion about this. Second option is that open access has shown that it is a sustainable business model. We, for example, turned our open access business numbers into the black after 6 years in 2007. So we already have 5 years of fully sustainable open access business. And open access had the potential to increase the transparency in scientific quality assurance. And another achievement of open access, and this is a great one, is that publishers are not anymore the keeper of the rights and of the copyrights and of the author's rights and so on. We are only a service provider, and nothing less, but also nothing more. So therefore, in terms of the question about the future, it is of course right that as a good service provider you have to listen to your customers always in all branches. And here the customers are the scientists. And I mean, it's anyway much more fun, really listen to them and satisfying them, because this is really a nice thing to do, and it's the collaboration with directly with the scientists, and we do this by publishing for scientific associations and not owning journals, is a very pleasant thing, and open access did there a lot.
Thank you very much. Eric?
I'm Eric Merkel-Sabota from Springer, and my major activities at Springer are communication, external and internal, but also policy making. So open access has been something that I've been dealing with in one way or another since I joined Springer in 2005. I think our attitude towards open access from the beginning was neutral. I think we tried to take some of the passion out of the, not necessarily, I mean, passion is a good thing, but sometimes it goes overboard and turns into something that is not so desirable. We said if our customers, if the researchers that are publishing want to try this business model, then who are we as a publisher to say no? So we started in 2005 with article-level open access, so hybrid models in our established journals, which is actually still growing, although it can be messy in terms of double dipping. You hear of publishers double dipping. We made a commitment not to do that, so not to charge, on the one hand, librarians for a subscription and then charge authors and institutions for APCs for publishing costs. So we have a correlation between the price of the journal, if it's still a subscription journal, and the volume of open access in that particular journal, so people don't pay twice. That just gut feeling, it's not a good thing. Of course, the biggest open access, at least for us, the biggest step in the direction of open access was, of course, our acquisition of Biomed Central in 2008, which made us overnight the largest open access publisher at that period. Now there's some debate. If you look at journals, it's PLOS. If you look at number of journals, it's us. That came to a shock. I mean, our competitors were shocked, some of them, but also some of our own publishers were shocked, because open access is a very good thing, especially for certain disciplines, and it's also something that is growing very quickly. To some established disciplines, it is seen as a threat, especially in the social sciences, where funding doesn't come centrally. It could kill a journal. It could kill a society, depending on how big the society is and where they're publishing, what they're publishing. So our attitude is still, I think it's a bit more positive than neutral now. In total, all of our content that we publish, about 15% now is open access. That's well into the 100,000 of articles, so that's quite a good thing. Again, I think there's a future. I don't think one size fits all was a phrase you used, I think. I don't think that's true. I still think there are sustainable open access models and there are unsustainable ones. But if it's sustainable, we're all for it, and we're willing to experiment even with things that we haven't done before. I mean, what's the point of being a scientific publisher if you don't experiment with what you can experiment with when you're publishing research about experiments? I think in the future, to answer the question, I think there will be publishers around. I think they might look differently. They might be performing different services. If you look at the growth of publishing from China, translation services, English is the de facto language of science, whether you like it or not. I don't think it will ever be Mandarin. But there is valuable research in those countries where English is not the native language, Brazil, for example, where publishers might have to work together with specialized organizations to make sure that the valid science that is published from those countries has the same quality, at least in language and understandability, that others do. So I think publishers will be around for a very, very long time. The roles they play might change. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, a cross-section of publishers, and we're all in agreement, or perhaps not. I think, what about the people who say, and some do, that the only reason the traditional publishing houses don't open up immediately is, of course, profit. Now, we can start with Angelica. How would you respond to that, I guess, accusation?
Well, I don't think that you could call us a traditional publishing house in that sense, because we are actually engaging in a huge amount of, Eric called it experiments. They started all as experiments, but they grew into programs largely or partially, and are still growing. Experimentation is something that needs to be funded, and that is what we're doing in our company. It's a different model to a family-owned company. It's a share-held company, and therefore that's how we develop our technology and processes and so forth further. But I think the point is that we are certainly not a traditional publisher in a sense. We've got, meanwhile, a number of pure golden open access journals. We have 1,200 journals that offer open access opportunities. We have 43 journals that are actually opening up their archives after certain amounts of times to the public or to everyone. I think I wouldn't see us as a traditional publisher.
Anyone like to respond?
I think if the question is, or if you're trying to insinuate that making profit is a bad thing, then the answer is no, it's not, because that's how we finance the investment, and that's precisely how we cover the losses of those experiments we try. Now, the last thing I will tell you as a commercial publisher, and unabashedly commercial, is that we don't care about profits. That's just not true. And I think anybody, even the so-called not-for-profit publishers, they don't make profits, they make surpluses, which is basically the same thing. It just sounds nicer. So anybody that tells you they're doing it for free or they're doing it not to make money might be true, but then they're backed perhaps by a very well-funded foundation, like the way PLOS got started. Nothing is for free. Some services that are rendered have to be paid for one way or another. And the way you stay alive as a company is you charge people a little bit more than your costs in order to invest. That's how it works.
Yeah,
Audrey?
I was going to pretty much say exactly the same thing, and then just echo the point. So OUP is a company with charitable status, so we don't make a profit, we make a surplus, like you say. So it's all very nice. But without that surplus, we wouldn't be able to reinvest in our business, we wouldn't be able to invest in the university, there wouldn't be a massive new wing of what used to be the Radcliffe Infirmary of Oxford University being built just over the road from our offices. I think I challenge you to give me an industry where there's no incentive to make profit, or any industry, companies are going to need to make a profit to reinvest, and to pay their staff.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, obviously, I don't think anyone is arguing that profit is a bad thing. I think there probably is an argument of the level of profit that perhaps Elsevier make, and I think that has been something that's come up from the cost of knowledge campaign, for example, that it is very high. And I think, Eric, you're right. Yes, we do make a surplus, but that is different from making money that is then turns into a dividend for shareholders, and it creates a very different incentive to a company that is doing it to reinvest in developing its technology, for example.
Thank you. Well, I think we should hold on that thought, and I think we should turn it over to the audience and let the audience respond to this. If we could have a show of hands if you have a question or comments. Anybody have a question or comment? Yes.
Just to follow up directly on what you said.
Please say who you are and who you represent.
I'm Uli Pöschl, and I'm chairing the Publications Committee of EGU, and I would also like to take the opportunity to welcome you and thank you for coming to our General Assembly to this discussion. And I fully agree that in order to have a sustainable operation, you have to make a surplus in order to stay flexible and so on. No point about that. But what I have always regretted over the past 10 years that we have been promoting open access successfully is that most traditional publishers back then did not try to move into open access while making profit. And the point is simply, we nowadays have all the content online and on the web, and for the same profit that you are already making, you could move much faster than you are doing it into open access. I know that there are sort of hurdles that you have to overcome within your own organizational structures and so on, and it's all not trivial, but as a matter of fact, the content is there online, and you could move much faster into making it openly accessible, and I'm glad that you now are moving much faster than in the past, because 5 years ago, some big publishers were trying to ridicule open access. That's now over, fortunately, and now I would really like to invite you to move jointly much faster than up to now into open access publishing. And that's sort of an invitation, and the point is simply, why do you think we couldn't do it also faster then you are doing it right now at the moment. What do you think would it take to make this process faster?
That's a fair point. We should be moving faster into open access. Well, I think I agree with you partially, which is already probably a good amount of space in the right direction. Again, what I mentioned earlier, for social sciences, it's not the right model. It's not the right model. Open access is perfect if funding is centralized. Open access is perfect for fast-moving science, maybe not for slow-moving science. Maybe it is, but up until now, the biggest challenge of open access is not whether a biomedical journal that is an open access journal is going to survive in terms of financial health. That's not an issue. But if you look at some of the slower-moving disciplines, human science, linguistics, these types of things, we can't convert everything. Another reason why we can't convert everything we might even want to convert is because we don't own all of the journals that we publish. Some are society journals. Some societies, maybe even the EGU, I don't know, we don't publish for you, you'd have to answer that, uses the surplus, which is such a much nicer word than profit, which is horrible, to cross-subsidize other activities of the society. So I disagree with you when you say, you're investing your profits into platforms, et cetera. I mean, what is the difference in providing a platform in the fall that is faster than the existing one for the scientists that need access to our articles? And I mean, let's face it, everybody is more impatient. Loading times have to be shortened. Platforms have to be more stable. Converting an existing subscription model journal into open access is not so easy. Even if there's a society behind it that wants to do so, and getting there is already quite a long way. It's not so easy. I mean, things have moved quickly, but I mean, remember, some of these societies, they're not interested in changing their business model because they want to be able to pay for their conferences. They want to be able to give bursaries to students. So I don't think it's going to happen. We're going as fast as we can. I know we are. I just don't see anything right now, unless you centralize funding for all sciences, to make that switch faster than we're doing right now.
Okay, Caroline?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think I would disagree that open access isn't, I can't remember, you said correct for all fields. It may be that it can work, but I think that also some fields, the discussion about how can we finance this has lagged as well. So at Coaction Publishing, we've got a couple of social science titles, we've got a few humanities titles, but those are actually funded in different ways, not article processing charges. So there is funding available, and there are funders who are very, very interested in that. And there are also universities with central funds that are more than willing to use those funds for also social science humanities. But those have been fields where also they've often published books, so there's kind of a double whammy. So I think it could work, but I think that we're still trying to have those discussions, and I know the MLA is very involved in those discussions of how could you make that happen if it's desirable. And I have to say, though, in terms of types of charges, though, there's also some fields where it could be quite easy to flip. And I think geological sciences could be one area, because I believe that on many journals you're already paying page charges, and you're probably paying charges for figures and whatnot. So there, in a way, there's always kind of a system already for authors or the funders to be paying for these kinds of fees. So it may be in some fields, it's much easier to flip those journals. And maybe that push has to come from the researchers themselves saying, hey, this is what we want. I know with the TELUS journals, we've been able to flip them to open access, and we've kept the same fee level they were already paying. It probably will increase a bit next year, but nonetheless, it's, that tradition's already there. So it's just a matter of pushing forward with it, I think.
We're just going to let Damien respond first, and then we're going to go to the audience and then back.
I was briefly just going to say, I guess we are only a science publisher, so we only see basic science and clinical research. But there are an awful lot of journals that aren't open access. It seems that the argument that social sciences and humanities, for example, don't fit the model, and law, for example, don't fit the model, therefore it's not suitable. I don't quite see the argument why all the science journals, which potentially do fit this model, aren't going open access.
Well, let's go to the gentleman in the front row first.
Hi, my name is Ken. I'm from the University of California, Santa Cruz, PhD student. I hope I can ask a question which is maybe US-centric, although it may be an issue in Europe too. There was the comment that double billing is not a good thing. But that still exists, as far as I understand it, in my situation, in many situations in the US, which is my research is funded with federal grant. And the American National Institute of Health has mandated that any research done with their funds must be open access, but NASA has not stated that, but it still is federal grants. Yet people who want to read anything I publish, if it's not open access, have to pay for it. But they've already paid through their taxes to fund this research. I consider that double billing, and I'm wondering if there's any way around that.
Okay, so that's not what Eric was referring to with double dipping. That's
you were talking about
he's
publishers
referring
and
to
libraries.
when an author pays a publication charge but then doesn't discount the subscription price.
Okay.
That's what's commonly known in the industry as double dipping, and it's something that I know Springer and OUP, for example, don't do. We discount our prices just like Springer do, and other publishers do as well. But on your actual question about the taxpayer initiative, this is always something that interests me, and there's a broad ethical argument behind it. And yes, you're correct. The NIH statement is that all NIH-funded material should be freely available after 12 months. And most publishers, OUP included, deposit material in PubMed Central, PMC as it's now actually called, on behalf of authors. So if you're an NIH grantee and you published in an OUP journal, your material would go to PMC with a 12-month embargo, which is fine, which is compliant with the policy. The whole taxpayer question is an interesting one because there's a whole variety of... a colleague of mine, David Crotty, works in our New York office, and he wrote an article. He writes for the Scholarly Kitchen, which is quite a popular academic publishing blog. And he wrote something recently about what he called the taxpayer fallacy. And it's just, I find this taxpayer argument quite curious because there's a whole host of services as a person in life that you go through, that you've paid taxes for, but then you have to pay for again. So, for example, the other day I went to London and I took the tube. So the tube is paid for by my taxes, but I still have to pay for a ticket when I go. And I of course, I understand the ethical argument behind it, but I don't think it's I don't think it's quite as clear cut as that.
First, Caroline.
Yeah, well, actually, I know what you're referring to. And in the wake of the Research Works Act, there's a new, you may be aware, there's a new act, FERPA, that's been put forth that would extend the NIH policy to other federal agencies in the United States. And I think I want to quote the Wellcome Trust in the UK, who is a major or the largest funder of medical research. They always say, look, it's so important to see publishing as a part of the research process. And I think if we could think that way, both in terms of the funders and the institutions and everyone, then there would be a willingness to also pay for that publishing of the article at the end so that we can do our job and still get a salary so we can put food on our tables. And so I think if we can kind of get a new structure around our thinking about that, then I think that taxpayer argument also in a sense makes sense. But we need to think about research as a process that doesn't end the minute you're done doing the research itself and are going to write up the paper, that the writing the paper is a part of it. And I just want to say, in terms of the economics, I actually think that the article processing charge is actually the least common model right now if you look across journals, perhaps not across the articles published. But it's kind of a smart one in the sense that you all know today that the default price of stuff you find online is zero. It doesn't cost anything. And if you find it where they want to charge you, you keep looking until you find it for free a lot of the time, I would bet. But I think what's really smart with the article processing charge is we kind of move what we're charging you for away from the thing that doesn't really cost us money. Because once I get an article up there, it really, other than I need to do some further research and development and these types, some overhead costs, it doesn't really matter to me if one person reads it or if 10 million or 1 billion read that article. So I'm moving the charge down to the part that actually costs me money. And I think that kind of can make better sense for people as well with that kind of model. Thanks for your comment.
Martin.
Yeah, I wanted to revisit what Caroline said before, and Damien also referred to, namely about the question. I totally agree with the problems for social science and the disciplines where the funding is not so well established. That's clear. But when we talk about science, medicine, also techniques, so STM publishing, the question is, of course, and there I would like to ask back to Eric, is of course why not changing all? And I mean, you mentioned two things. The one thing was about the where I have a bit of problem was, the one thing was that you said, okay, business, profit or surplus is fine, okay, but you said, okay, what is so bad about charging slightly more than you need? I mean, here, first of all, I would like to ask, what is slightly more? And then, of course, the question is, when we talk about, you said that for some societies you cannot change. The question is there the opportunity for all the societies you publish journals for to switch? When they would say, we want to switch to open access, do they can? Is it definitely the approach?
Yeah, of course. First of all, one thing I'm not going to get into, especially with a very active and acquisitive competitor, is issues of pricing. That's not going to happen here. Indeed, I would probably be arrested upon my return. I'm also not going to get into a debate about what an appropriate profit margin is. That is best left to political parties. I'm not going to get involved there. We are very profitable, and we are very proud of that. And this profit, a very large chunk of our profit, some of it does go to our shareholders, that's true, but a large chunk of it is reinvested. And we're investing an awful lot of money. And I slightly disagree with what Caroline has said, is that it's only a little, it doesn't really matter if one person or 10,000 people read an article. Well, if they all want to read it at the same time, it does make a difference. And you have to invest in systems, very expensive systems, just to maintain the platforms. Also, archiving. That's also, we're getting into data archiving now, talking about who's responsible for archiving data, which is, I mean, petabytes of data. That's going to be the next big challenge. And the last thing, I think also there are issues if next year or the year after the technology changes. We all remember, well, not everyone in this room, but some of us remember CD-ROMs. If there's a technological change, who's responsible for making sure that it's accessible in the future? That's us. So lots of costs. We do make a healthy profit. A lot of those are reinvested.
I would like to take you on the last point that you made. So most of the other things I agree, these are issues, which way you run the business, etc., that we don't need to get into here now. That's, I think, clear to everybody. But the point is, on the archiving issue, I think this is a fundamentally flawed approach to think that individual companies should archive the knowledge of the world for the world. I think the archiving task is a fundamental task of society, and it's also primarily already now done by central libraries, and the state and society have to do this task. Now the point is, without open access, and I know that from direct conversation with these people, they have a major problem to archive stuff where some publisher keeps the copyright without Creative Commons license or something equivalent. So I would strongly argue exactly your last argument that you make. You as a service provider should aim for open access actively in order to make sure that your service will persist for the future. And that's actually one of the strongest arguments for open access, is to ensure permanent availability of the content for the future. And I think, and that's what I'm actually missing from traditional publishers, let's not fight about the definition, but about non-open access publishers simply, or publishers who do not try to make all of their content open access as quickly as possible. It is really, I think, a major mistake to do so, because you are not able to guarantee permanent accessibility no matter how big your company is.
Very quickly, and then Angelica, very quickly.
Let me just very quickly say, first of all, one thing we haven't addressed, maybe Angelica will do that, is the whole issue of access. I mean, you have to think, I would be very surprised if there were many people in here, in this room, that did not have the access to the things they need through their institutions. There will be exceptions, developing countries, etc. So that's also something. when you talk about how important is it when you have what you need, I mean, fair enough if it's open access, if it's a policy decision by governments or funders. We want you to publish open access so that it is available, and we want you to use Creative Commons licenses, which we do with all of our things. That's fine. We're totally accepting of that. But part of the system, part of subscription, the subscription system works well. It's not perfect, like so many things in life. It's not perfect, but it works well. Open access is not the answer to every difficulty that the subscription model brings up. In terms of archiving, we're involved, and Elsevier is involved in OUP. I'm sure all of the major publishers have archived everything they've ever published, even those things behind a firewall, at, is it 12, 11 different major national libraries. So that's all happening. But those national libraries will not do the conversions of the data for us when the next kind of technology leap comes. We'll have to invest to make sure that our customers have access. And the issue of the world having access in archives, that's quite another one, in which we are cooperating as much as we can. But I do not think, again, that we will move everything into open access as fast as you might want to, because it also might not be appropriate.
Angelica?
Well, Eric's pretty much answered this as well. What I would like to add is just on the subject of accessing the information in the first place. We, not just Elsevier, but most publishers are working together with the UN and many other organizations to try and secure access to information for people who do not have the funding as we expected here in the developed world. There is a tremendous amount of effort going into ensuring that research in developing countries, emerging countries, many different parts of the world can actually function as well, or as well as, almost as well as it does here, and drive innovation and drive developments and economic developments in those worlds. I think on the archiving, I would agree. I think I would like to add that we're not only talking about archiving pure text here anymore. I think if we're looking into the future, we're looking at archiving data, simulation models, audio, video. I mean, scientific publishing is no longer just flat PDF. There's a lot of technology that is coming our way, and as Eric quite rightly says, it's a tremendous task and costs a lot of money to try and ensure that whatever goes back to 1823 or even earlier is actually also moved along with those developments.
Gentleman near the back.
So, David Ham, Imperial College London. I'd just like to briefly respond to what the gentleman from Springer said. Imperial College London is, I think, most people would here know, by European standards, a really rather rich institution. I can tell you that on a regular basis, we do not have access to the papers that we need access to, and that isn't in a third world country, and that isn't in a poor institution. There is already a significant problem with that, and I think I can tie this back to the point that there is a fundamental problem with closed archiving. And the fundamental problem is that if I'm paying at the point of publishing, there's a market. If I publish an EGU journal and they do a rubbish job, next time I will not publish an EGU journal. We can fix that problem. If I want to read an old article that Elsevier has a monopoly on that article. There's no market. No one else can tell Elsevier what to charge for that. I can't go and read another journal article, right? I mean, these are not replaceable objects. And that causes, I think, a large chunk of what's going on here. And that's why, I mean, you don't want to talk about price. That's why, in particular, individual article charges are ludicrous. And in that context, I think that the core problem here is that closed archives don't work for science.
Okay, please keep your answers brief so you can all answer these questions, because I see you're all keen to do so. Eric, go ahead.
If you're referring to first of all, there's always interlibrary loan, which, I mean, Imperial College even has that. The second thing is, you're referring to individual sort of, I want to buy one article and that's 30 euros and that's outrageous. Well, I agree with you. And which is why we're looking into, it doesn't happen very often that people say, I need access to 10 articles a year. That's all I want. I don't want any more. But we're developing business models through a web shop now where that price will go down way, 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 way down. I mean, more than 75%. Also, if you are, for example, a small to medium-sized enterprise and you need access to maybe only 100 articles, well, then we'll come up with pricing models where you get a discount for, just like an Oyster card, you know, for however much money you pay, and that's how many articles you'll get. So I agree with you there. We could be doing a better job in terms of individual access. If you're talking about, I don't have access to an article in a journal that my library hasn't subscribed, you need to look at ILL, or you need to talk to your librarian and convince him or her of the necessity to subscribe to that journal. That's all I can say.
Damien.
A few points. I guess, well, yeah, as you pointed out, I was at UCL and had exactly the same issue. I would be very surprised if there's anyone in the room who hasn't had problems finding papers, to be honest. And it really is, you know, it's incredibly wasteful. I'm not just talking about, you know, it's just an unbelievable waste of time. You can spend 2 hours trying to get a paper. You know, interlibrary loans aren't very good. You often don't know whether you want the paper until you've got it. You know, it just seems to me that open access is just better. I mean, surely it's just better to have this stuff out there where everyone can read it. And, you know, yes, it's terrific that you're making these improvements, but it does, and better pricing structures, but I still think it doesn't seem as good as the alternative, which is to have everyone able to read it wherever they want.
The question, I suppose, is also, can everybody pay initially for having their work published? I mean, there are differences. There are great funders around who are taking over the task of actually financing the publication of research work. It is probably slightly different if you're in a third world country and you're an excellent researcher. Do you find funding opportunities then easily? So I think there are different situations and different solutions for those situations. And so I would really echo what Eric is saying. I think you're saying as well. We have to look at the requirements of researchers out there. We have to look at requirements of patients. We have to look at requirements of all those different people that consume scientific information. And there will probably be different answers. Maybe you just want the information for 24 hours. Why not rent it at a very, very low cost? So there are different possibilities I think we need to look at.
Martin, then Rodri.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I have a bit of problem with this argument of people cannot afford the publication fees and so on, because I mean I think all of us, the open access publishers, have models for waiving or at least subsidizing the charges, and I mean this is really something. I mean some, for example. You use for Springer Oakman, I guess, the model that you take the list of the poorest countries and the authors from these countries get free papers. And what we are, for example, doing is that we even waive or subsidize papers from people who are in developed countries. Yeah, I mean it is really about what is the individual situation. It might be the PhD student from University of Vienna who has a problem. And I mean we have, for example, 10%. Yeah, 10% of our annual pages are free. And that means either 10% of the articles waived completely or 20% subsidized by 50%. And this is really a significant amount of papers. And this is what we do in terms of holding back money to provide this opportunity. And I mean, you said that you have to keep, or part of the money you have to keep is, let's say we keep money, no surplus, no profit, we keep money, is for ensuring the archiving and file conversions. And there I also do not agree, because what the colleague from London said is in principle right. When you make sure about the license and about the access model that it is following the logs concept, that it is distributed around the world, then you do not have to care too much about it anymore. that's a good thing. And if you then also archive it, for example, with Portico or with clocks in machine-readable format in full-text XML or so on, it is really about others to care in 50 or 100 years to make it readable. And I think if you have scientific papers in machine-readable format, I can sleep well, because I think in the future there will be people grabbing this content and making it available again.
Well, there's a lot to respond to. I mean, just quickly on the point from UCL, I would echo what Eric said. I think we have been slow in providing proper single access usage. I think most publishers are moving towards some sort of rental scheme at a lot cheaper price than $30, which obviously is too much. So I'd agree with you on that point. I just want to come back to the open access is better argument, because it's a slight simplification, I'd argue, and no, but seriously, coming back to Ali's point about why not for all of science. Well, I mean, I'm actually going to tell a story about a law journal, but it's going to come back to the same thing. So I publish law journals. I have a list of 41 law journals. We have one open access one, which I'll come back to. The others, there is no money for APCs. There's no appetite for APCs. And if we suddenly made them all open access, we would have to stop publishing them. And the people who enjoy, appreciate, read those journals would not be able to read them anymore. And people would not have that outlet for their research either, which also, so it's a dead loss. The one open access journal we have, just interestingly, is not paid by APCs. It's funded by an institution, and it's funded by a very poor institution called Harvard University, who we know have no money. So anyway, but just to relate that to science as well, I mean, you can't blanket say all of science. I mean, is there the funding in mathematics, for example? I don't know if you're counting that as science. Eric made the point earlier. I know mathematics is a thorny issue, but is there funding in mathematics for open access publishing? If someone has an answer to that question from the floor, then fine, please do address it. And the other point I was going to make is on Eric's point about societies. So 70% of OUP's journals are owned by societies, and a lot of those societies are very resistant to open access publishing, more than we are as a publisher. And they're very worried about the loss of revenue. They're very worried about not being able to throw events like this. And they're very worried about not being able to fulfill their mission as a scientific publisher or a scientific society. And I'm not saying that's correct, but in that sense, it doesn't all lie with the publisher.
All right, we're going to go back to the floor, and if we could have both of you with your comments or questions, and then we'll see what the panelists have to say. You first.
Hello, my name is Robin Webster. I write for a website called Carbon Brief, and what we do is we kind of monitor and cover the debate around climate and energy issues, particularly in the UK press. And a sort of pattern that we've noticed, and I just wondered if this is something you've considered, is the impact of open access publishing on the way that climate science particularly is covered in the public debate and covered in the media. And the pattern that you see, for example, is when an article becomes available on the web, sometimes maybe 6 months after it's been published in the journal or in some way becomes public, suddenly it's very likely to be covered by the media and much more likely to be picked up by journalists, not always accurately, but it will be published. But then the kind of weird pattern that you then see, it's sort of slightly bizarre, is that these few journals that have somehow become available on the web have attracted a disproportionate amount of attention in the public debate, whereas the majority of the research that's going, often very important research, which is relevant to the public debate, remains behind a paywall. It's a slightly weird situation.
And at the back?
Hi, my name's Aaron O'Leary. I'm from the PhD student from the University of Leeds. I just wanted to respond to a comment about taxpayers that just came from OUP. You said that there are lots of things that we pay for twice, that we're taxed for initially and that we then pay for afterwards. You gave the example of the Tube in London. But your argument doesn't take into account externalities. So, for example, taking the Tube is largely of benefit to you and only to you, possibly of wider benefit to other people, but largely it's only a benefit to you. But free research is arguably of benefit to all of society and not just you as a single individual. So I'll give you examples from the UK, despite UK PLC's best efforts, of things that are still free, that we still pay for through taxation. So for example, defence or sewage or the roads. I mean, we might move to a road pricing system in the future, but at the moment, roads are free at the point of...
Do we not pay road tax for our cars?
No, we pay vehicle excise duty, actually.
I'm clearly going...
Which is based on emissions, which you could argue is dealing with environmental externalities.
My father worked for the Inland Revenue for 20 years, but clearly I haven't taken in his knowledge the way you have. Sorry, carry on.
So, well, that's my point largely. I mean, I don't pay tax. I'm not on a high enough pay grade at the moment, but the point really is that there are things that we pay for through taxation that we do only pay through once, and it is arguably one of the roles of government to provide these things without having to pay for them afterwards.
Yeah, I take your point. It was a slightly crass example, but okay.
I would like to respond first. Damien?
Not on that point. I had another point.
Eric?
Maybe to the point of media spikes and climate change and not the best articles perhaps getting the coverage. All of us here work closely with journalists and also with the PR offices of research institutions and universities, so that when, and it's an imperfect system, if we are alerted, and usually this happens through the journal, the editor-in-chief, or sometimes the researcher themselves, or sometimes even the press office of the research institution, they will alert us to the fact that a paper that is very, very important, not necessarily in climate change, it can be anything, is coming up, and would we give it treatment, i.e., would we help in the translation between the scientific article and an article on the science pages of the daily press? And we do that. One thing we have found is that there are many controversial researchers who are actually quite good at maintaining their own relations with the media. And there's nothing we can do about that, as long as embargoes are respected, and we're quite liberal about those as well. When we give an article this kind of treatment, we make it available to anyone that wants it. We don't have an automated system where the individual article is made open access right away, but anybody, even a reader of the newspaper, where if the journalist has referenced the article, we will provide it to them. They say, I read this in The Guardian, or I read this in The Times. We will send it to them for free. But you're right, this kind of hyping of certain articles is, on the one hand, a good thing, and on one hand, not such a good thing.
Roger?
I was quite interested in that point, actually. And similarly to Springer, if we have a newsworthy article or something that the journal has told us that they think is newsworthy, we'll just make it freely available, actually, and then anyone can access it. But it's just curious because it goes against, we've done this sort of analysis on journals. We have many journals which we make freely available after 12 months or X period of time. And all our usage analysis shows that there's a spike at the start of the chart when the article is published, but there really isn't then much of an upward spike after 12 months. There's maybe a little increase, but not a lot. So it's interesting to hear. I mean, we don't publish much on climate change, so maybe it's a different field. But I was interested to hear that, but it does go contrary to what our usage of our existing journals has shown.
Caroline, would you like to respond to no? Any other panelists? Damien?
I was wondering if I could go back to something Angela said earlier, which was about the ability for authors to pay. And it seems like this is what it all comes down to, this main argument that the author paying is problematic, it's coming out of your grants, and and you as scientists, probably this is the key issue, this is funding that you have to find, potentially. And you're right, this, it is very problematic, and especially in developing countries. And regardless of the waiver policy, I think there's a bigger issue, which is that more and more institutions are actually putting money into a pot that goes towards open access publishing. And I would recommend that anyone who is thinking about publishing OA goes to your institution and just find out whether there is such money available. Because at the moment, your institutions are paying enormous amounts of money, and really enormous amounts of money to pay for these subscriptions. So what is required for a move to open access is for a lot of that money to be moved into a pot, which would then go towards publication fees instead. And a lot of institutions are doing that, and those funds are getting bigger. And just to point out, yes, that it's worth checking whether such funds exist in your university.
We have a comment from the audience near the window.
Hello, my name is Michael von Papen from the University of Cologne. I would like to know, because we've been talking a lot about money right now, and of course as a consumer everybody wants to pay as less as possible, but there's another thing that which is much more important, which is the quality of the paper. And so I would like to know what can you do as open access publisher to make sure that you offer the same quality as, let's say, traditional publisher.
So first Damien, then Martin.
This is obviously something that's raised with us a lot. So PLOS ONE, as I said, has very different criteria for publication, and an argument that is often raised is that it's because we publish lower quality work. And it is a risk in open access publishing. There is a risk of vanity publishing, and there's also a risk for, you know, more kind of fly-by-night operations to publish anything in order to make money. So you do need to be careful, and you know, it requires a reputation that I think just comes. People won't submit to journals if they know that they're not very good, I think. So there's that, and with PLOS ONE, I think our rejection rate is about a third. So we reject about a third of papers for just not being of a high enough standard scientifically to be published. I don't know, whether you think that's reasonable, but that seems to me a fairly good go at, that means that 2/3 of papers that are submitted to us are scientifically accurate, and that sounds about right to me. But it is an issue, and I think that the only way you can work it is by sort of developing reputations and making sure that you are applying sufficient rigor at peer review.
Martin, and then Caroline.
Exactly. I like this topic because it is, of course, a good question, what happens to the peer review. And as I said before in our initial statement, the good thing for open access is that you have the opportunity to increase the quality assurance, or at least to increase the transparency by, for example, making open access, as I said, not only to the published article, but to the whole process, which is only possible in open access. And when you do this either by commenting through the process and hiding it afterwards, as for example, you do it at PLOS, or Nature also experimented with it, or you do it like we do it, that we even keep it and so on. It is really the good thing is that you can really let the audience, namely the scientists, decide if the peer review was appropriate or not, because we just show it. And the good thing is that this helped us, for example, a lot to decrease the rejection rates. I mean, when I publish at conferences, everybody is saying, "Oh, we have 90% rejection rate," and I don't know why this argument should be something great or should be say something about the quality here. And we, for example, have only 15% rejection rate, and I do not think that they are poor journals, because I mean we have a lot of journals within impact factor. In some cases, the highest impact factors in their fields, and also with the most articles. So open access is there really something which is not only we have to care about, that we have also a good peer review, but it's really an opportunity and a chance to show what it is about in the peer review, or even to increase it, the quality assurance.
Caroline?
Yeah, just on that topic, I wanted to mention that when we launched OWASPA as an organization in 2008, one of the issues that we were grappling with was this argument, this must be vanity publishing, all of it, because of the way you're charging. And at that time, there were a couple of groups that came out overnight, launched 300-400 journals with no content, and said, now we're the biggest publisher, and gave lots of flashy stuff. So we actually established very, very strict criteria. So, and I, as a WASPA president, regularly receive phone calls from librarians and researchers saying, have you heard of these people? Can I trust them? And so what I often say is, please take a look at the criteria we use it yourself. And I said it to librarians too. So when we have someone apply, we look to see, okay, we look at the licensing. Is it at least a CC BY, so it's just attribution, or is it the CC non-commercial? Is it clear? Can I tell on the website? Is it the same when I look at the PDF in the article? Do I see an editorial board? And do I see names and preferably institutions with that editorial board? And would I recognize them if I was in that field? I look across journals. If one guy is the editor of 30 journals and they're in fields from Scandinavian history to paleontology, I have to scratch my head and say, that's a little odd. And then we also look for a description of the peer review process, not just it's blind or double blind, but what does that mean? What happens to that article when it comes, or is it open? What's the process? So clearly, some have seen this as an opportunity to jump in because the perhaps startup costs look to be less, but the job we're doing is very, very serious. And a lot of the people who you see at BMC, at Springer Open, my own company, others, came from the publishing industry. We came from Nature, we came from Elsevier, we came from Taylor and Francis, what have it. So, and then we do have some scholars that have launched organizations as well. So we don't want to penalize newcomers to the market, but we do want to make sure that they're keeping up to the same standards that we find are so important. Because, as you know, quality and the seriosity of what we publish is everything. And if we don't maintain that, you're not going to come back, and we won't exist anymore. So the best way to vote with that, if you find something that's crap, is to walk away. So.
Eric, very briefly, and then over to the audience.
Just
again.
a quick to that point about quality and open access. One of the sad but true positive aspects of hybrid open access publishing, which is a messy process anyway, is that you get both. You get the same name, the same journal, but your article is open. Now, that is imperfect for a number of reasons, which we won't go into. But at Springer, in general, when this happens, the article that's submitted goes through peer review and final acceptance, and then the author is informed, do you wish this to be published open access? If yes, do you have institutional funds? Is there a subscription to the institutional funds or whatever? So it doesn't really play, the quality is no different in all of the hybrid journals that we publish. And again, there are fly-by-night operations, as Caroline says, but most reputable companies, whether they're open access or they're traditional with open access like we are, they're just as good. The quality is just as good as the difference you have in the quality of journals themselves.
Okay, now we're into the final 15 minutes, and I'd like to hear from as many of you as possible. So if you could keep your hands raised, and I know 2 of you have microphones, so if we could start with the one at the back, and then keep your arms raised if you have questions and comments. So first at the back.
Hi, I'm David Jones from the British Antarctic Survey. The Cost of Knowledge website claims that about 10% of research grants are spent on subscriptions for your journals. What I'm wondering really is, are you doing 10% of the research, 10% of the infrastructure, or is there any 10% of the scientific process that you can claim that you're contributing? And if not, how much can you?
Okay, in the front row.
Yes, hello. My name is Ross Hoffman. I work at Atmospheric and Environmental Research. I want to invite the panelists to talk a little bit about what else is going to evolve in the future as publishing houses and journals evolve. This was touched on a little bit already. What's the role of the author, the editor, the reviewer? Is the definition of an article going to change in the future? Thank you.
And one more from the front.
My name is Edmund Nicholas. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Geological Society of London. I see that learned societies are indirectly represented on the panel. There are learned societies who publish in their own right. And I just wanted to pick up on the lethargy in terms of the movement to open access. What we do as a society, other than publish, is only sustainable through the surpluses that we earn from publishing. Not all societies are the same. Not all of them earn a great deal of surplus from conferences and so on. But by and large, they do tend to publish profitably. Now, I think the difficulty is managing the transition. And if I remember what Martin said, it was that as far as Copernicus and all that is concerned, broke even after 5 or 6 years. Very, very few societies could sustain 5 years of lack of income. And the consequence of that, potentially, is that the societies will fold, and with it, the deep archives that they have. The archive of my society goes back to 1811. I am not suggesting that all of it is immediately relevant, but in certain fields, such as paleontology, the content is relevant because the half-life is 200 or more years. There's an enormous amount here in terms of working with learner societies to manage the transition. And I haven't really heard anybody tell me how we're going to manage that.
In the final few minutes, we're going to let you all respond and make a couple closing remarks. So keep it brief, but we'll start with Martin.
Okay, yeah, because I was just mentioned, I totally agree. But what we did with the 5 years of establishment was starting from 3 small journals up to more than 20 journals, and some of them very big. So this was a problem. We also had transitions of existing and established with an impact factor closed access models, journals, and we transferred them into open access. And once they have, when they are in a field where funding is, and when they have an impact factor, we charged right from the beginning. So when you then transfer them into open access, then it's not such a delay. I totally agree that 5 years, of course, you cannot afford without the income. But when you have an established journal, that shouldn't be such a problem.
I look forward to working with you. In terms
Yes, yeah.
Angelica, would you like to respond?
I would like to respond to the gentleman in front.
Sure.
About the future, the question about the future of the article. I think that's a very exciting question, and certainly in this framework here of this conference, because I think geologists are actually leading the way there in many different aspects. We've been working with geologists in particular, but also other scientific areas, in order to look at how traditional articles can actually be bettered, so to say, or improved in their functionalities, in order to improve the way that the information can be reused and actually drives new discoveries and new developments and new innovations and new research results. And there's a lot of collaboration between your society here and Elsevier, for example, in linking data, in making information available that is publicly available, but not necessarily linked with the research information that is being published. There's tremendous possibilities there, and I think that's one area where close collaboration between societies, but also researchers, authors, and editors will drive tremendous effectivity and productivity for future research. So I don't see the article as we see it at the moment stay in the future. I think it will change tremendously to the benefit of science.
Caroline?
I can make two quick comments. I'll start with yours, since it follows up in yours. I think it's going to be radically different. And I think we have to bear in mind, as publishers at least, that we're not involved in publishing articles. We're involved in helping scientists communicate results and the outputs of the research. And so I think things are going to look radically different than they do today. But I am completely limited by my imagination to know exactly where that's going to be. So it will be exciting. Maybe we don't need to be as long. Maybe they'll be smaller. Maybe there'll be annotations to things. In many fields, I think probably a video would be much more accurate than writing up results. So there's the options are just growing and growing in the digital environment that we have now. And then to go back to the society issue, at our last conference in OWASP last year, and I think this will continue this year, we had a number of societies come that are grappling with open access. How do we do this? And I really saw that they honestly felt that we understand we need to be moving in this direction. We know our members would like it, but it's hard. And exactly for the size and kind of financial position that you were describing, some of them have introduced an open access journal alongside the subscription journal, to try and see if that can start growing and developing alongside the other journal. Some have also introduced an option, thinking that, and this opened my eyes a bit, said, I know the problem of double dipping, and we know what the bigger publishing houses are grappling with on that. On the other hand, for us, that might be a way to help transition and flip it. Maybe at some point it will get to be so much within the next 5 years that then we can flip it over, because by then there'll be enough funding, et cetera, et cetera. So we do recognize, and I honestly do not have a complete answer for you. But I think we need to start bringing the societies together so they can share what's working and not working for each other, and see how can we fix this if that's the direction they want to go.
Damien?
Yeah, I'd actually echo a lot of that on the first point about article of the future. I think there's an awful lot of very exciting. Elsevier actually, probably leading the way in this, and they're doing some really amazing things in terms of better use of annotation and better use of making an article more dynamic, for example. I think the other big thing will be with data, better kind of embedding of data into papers, so that they become a much more kind of workable unit that people can take the results from. On the point about societies, I think, Caroline, you're largely right. I think there's I think things are changing, unfortunately, for societies, and it's not in the same situation where they would get very large amounts of money from publishers, and I think that is kind of drying up now. So we do need to look for alternatives, and I think doing that through open access channels is certainly preferable. And as again, I think that's probably what a lot of the members want. I think there's probably a lot of it comes from sort of evolution of the societies themselves, and I think that probably if they can work together to achieve that, then I think that would be more productive for them.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting actually that one of the drivers of increased journal pricing has come from society demand, because societies have renegotiated. Societies, I guess, seeing some of the writing on the wall in many ways, have renegotiated tougher and tougher deals with publishers to take a larger extent of profit anyway. But anyway, I was going to talk to the future. I think the really interesting thing we'll see in the next year in terms of open access publishing is the direct entry into the market of a funding body or multiple funding bodies in the form of eLife, which sounds like an insurance policy, but it's actually a journal you wouldn't believe, but there you go. A journal published by the Wellcome Trust, HHMI, and the Max Planck Society, and they basically have taken the perspective that they're going to short circuit the publishing process in a way and make their own entry. No article processing fees for 4 years, paying peer reviewers. Potentially a massive influence on the ecology of the publishing market, and it remains to be seen how successful it is. But it's a very interesting move from those three funders, and that I think will be the key thing to see in the next couple of years.
And Eric, finally.
I agree with just about everything that's been said, so I'm not going to keep it too long. I think Caroline's point that we look at ourselves as being article publishers. In Springer's case, that's not quite true, because we have a long tradition of publishing books as well. And whereas book is a 4-letter word for some other publishing companies, we're actually quite fond of our books. And our books are quite clunky, and the print runs are rather small. But we also have the largest ebook collection in the world in terms of science, which is at 52,000 as of yesterday, I think, 52,000 titles. We're also retro-digitizing everything we have and can find the rights for back to the 1840s. And that project was launched at the Frankfurt Book Fair last year and will be hopefully finished by the end of this year. But there's the next challenge in terms of open access books. Where's that going to go? It's going to come. It's going to happen. But where's it going to go? In what direction? What do the business models look like? So I'm quite looking forward to the future.
Thank you. Well, it seems that we're left with perhaps more questions than answers. But it does also seem that we all seem to be in agreement with the idea that we should all work together to improve science and improve the reach of science, not only in our own countries and continents, but across the world. And on that note, I would like to thank, firstly, our panelists, who really do represent a cross-section of many of the domains within publishing, for coming here and sharing their views with us ever so diplomatically. If we could have a big round of applause to them to start. And if I could also thank, of course, the EGU, my employers, and Copernicus, Martin, for organizing this fantastic conference. This week has been really dynamic and exciting so far. And of course, we're only halfway through 3 hours ago. In fact, we hit the halfway mark. So there's plenty left to come. And on that note, the second debate in our great debate series, there are 2 this year. The second debate is tomorrow, and it kicks off at 12:15 in room 15. And the topic there is the role of geoscientists in the mitigation of natural disasters. So quite a different topic, but hopefully just as stimulating as this past couple of hours has been. Finally, if I could thank the audience, both in this room for your participation and for coming out, and also everybody who's listening to us around the world. And if I could leave you also with a plug for the EGU's social media, please follow us on Twitter, Euro Geosciences, and on Facebook and all the other major platforms. We are really increasing our base there and hoping to get all of you along. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you again to our panelists, and enjoy the rest of the week.